It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, 1 p.m. here in a sunny Chicago, 4 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 9:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young, the IPO-VID livestream, Series 32, Episode 6, that is in the aggregate. Episode 192 starts here. First of all, there's been a very exciting couple of developments in the Euronext bid for the Greek stock exchange. It looks as if they're over 50% plus one share as a hurdle. There are still, by the looks of it, a very significant number of holdouts to the original ambition of managing to take 100% of the company. At the same time, good news for Euronext, they've got permission from the Greek regulators to buy the Greek stock exchange. Hong Kong Exchange, they've made an interesting strategic investment in CMU OmniClear Holdings. That's going to accelerate development of all manner of interesting bond trades and settlements up and down through the wondrous Connect pipelines. And indeed, the seemingly natural long-term base for CMU OmniClear has to be in Hong Kong exchanges, one would presume, within the SAR, given its product and operational suite and the state of the SAR exchange monopoly legislation. A welcome investment, it's a logical step for the development of the tradable RMB yield curve and more. Sad news to finish with in our opening remarks. Monica Singer, a previous guest at IPO-VID 94, straight to the blockchain. The former straight boss, Monica Singer, most recently a blockchain pioneer, passed away after a lengthy fight with cancer during the course of the weekend. RIP to a great woman who was much more than just a colourful figure in South Africa. She was a global figure in clearing and settlement, and our condolences to her friends, family, and of course, any extended relatives. Today, ladies and gentlemen, this is a recorded show while the FIA Expo is pulsating many floors below me in the Sheraton Grand Hotel here by the Chicago River. We have the highlights of last week's AFM Tech Day in association with Connemara EP3, which was hosted at the Union League Club. Our guest, in many ways, requires no introduction. He's a previous guest on IPO-VID, Professor Dr. Richard Sandor, the OG of financial ETD. He invented financial futures and, as an encore, he invented environmental markets and much else in between. That's only part of his incredible legacy, ladies and gentlemen. And this was the fireside chat, which it was my honor to manage to deliver, introducing the fabulous, the incredible, the mellifluous, the true Renaissance man of Chicago and global markets, Professor Dr. Richard Sandor, and as I'll say in just a moment on the recording, Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur de France, and many other things besides. Watch this show, ladies and gentlemen, and enjoy. It's a corking discussion with a true genius of financial markets.
It's a joy to be here, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute joy to have Richard with us today. Thank you very much, Pat Kenny, for opening remarks. Thank you very much to all the team at Connemara for the great work that you've put in. Thank you, Dan, for being a lifesaver by producing a cable at the last minute, which helped us with the live stream, which I hope you are enjoying to this day, for all those of you who are not able to be with us today, but you're with us in spirit as much as anything else. One thing I would have to say is, in my opening remarks, is that Richard just pointed out to me that behind every great man, there is a great woman. And we've just seen Jim on stage, and there's absolutely no doubt that behind him stands the impeccable Miss Maureen Downs. And I have to say, I'm extremely upset you're not on stage this morning, Maureen, because I think you would have added a great deal more, if I may so say, pizzazz than any of the gentlemen so far, even possibly Professor Dr. Richard Sandor. But also, well, Richard just pointed out to me, and hopefully we can see it on screen, just outside the door, we can admire a magnificent artwork. And that is something which was created by your incredible wife, Richard, Ellen. She is truly, well, in many ways, she is clearly the feminine engine and energy to your masculine. She has been such a creative power, creative talent, and over, good grief, what, 62, 63 years of marriage, you have powered through to do so many things. By means of introduction of the gentleman who's with me today, let me put it to you this way, ladies and gentlemen. Unless you're working purely in commodity futures and options, you wouldn't have a job in this industry today, because there wouldn't be an industry. the Union League Club would have been impoverished because Pat Kenny would have been barely able to manage to pay the membership dues over the course of the last 50 years, let alone the father-daughter dances, etc., etc. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the OG. Invented markets. I don't just mean created an exchange, randomly brought people together. He created the financial futures markets. And then, because, you know, midlife crises are like that, he went on to create the carbon markets, which is an even greater epithet. I would advise you, there was a fantastic speech last night. Actually, I've just had the joy of watching it in Beijing. You were addressing an audience. This man can time travel. And it was phenomenal to see what's going on. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you today the great, the unique, the one, the only, the impeccable, the beautifully coiffed with a magnificent hat as well. And I'm purely trying to emulate his eminent style, Richard Sandor. Richard, welcome.
Patrick, hello, is that on? Disregard all of the fake news that Patrick has been consumed by. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with all of you as colleagues in an industry that has given us all opportunities to achieve our very best. And it's always fun to work with Patrick. He and I go back many decades, and his insights, his intelligent observations of the industry always spark intellectually. Hey, I got to give a shout out to the Downs family, if I can. Maureen, who ran RCG, in memory of Les Rosenthal and Bob Collins, and a special shout out for Jim, who developed all of the technology which allowed us to build an exchange and to create carbon markets around the world. So thank you for your friendship and all of those years. And Pat, I can't say enough of, and I'll end it with there, who's been a long-term friend and a colleague for decades as well.
Well, just thinking about this, I mean, you've lived a life between technology and markets, Richard, because, good grief, I mean, not all of your achievements. What was it, 1971, you were sitting in California as an academic, and you essentially prototyped what could have been the world's first electronic marketplace. If I seem to recall correctly, it had a thriving pulse of 1400 baud was going to run through the acoustic couplers that were going to connect it. In comparison, we're running video today through the Philippines to Africa and the rest of the world at 120 megabits a second. It's quite an incredible world. Tell us a little bit about how you thought about the idea of developing not just a new commodity market, but an electronic one at that 50 years ago, 54 years ago.
I was trading commodities, and the Bank of America came to me. They wanted to support a palm oil contract in San Francisco. There were no locals, and they said, would you set up a project? We'll pay your salary for the quarter and see if it would be possible to develop an electronic marketplace in San Francisco that would provide liquidity from remote places outside of the Bay Area. And so I spent the quarter off, came to this town, tried to figure out the algorithms that went out, tried to figure out how the big specs redistributed to the small specs, how orders traded over in a pit, developed a prototype, and enjoyed every moment of it. It died like a lead balloon because the organizers didn't want to take the risk at that time of doing it electronically, and went up to a normal exchange. One of the key things of that study was to recommend for-profit exchanges. So it was going to be not only electronic, it was going to be for profit. So you can imagine I was very careful when I turned the engine on in my car. It wasn't a popular concept, Patrick.
Well, it's quite incredible. You think about that. I mean, that puts you a solid 15 years ahead of OM being effectively the first for-profit exchange that would actually succeed. And I think there was also what Bermuda's Intex, and you'll put me right on other for-profit markets during the 70s that didn't cohere.
Yeah, it was a center of a big exchange because the paper was mysteriously lost. We don't know how. And subsequently, the Wagner patent came out, and the Wagner patent, if the FT pointed out the similarity in the design for our system with the Wagner patent, and it went into litigation and a whole bunch of other things. But the idea was in the air, most importantly, a half a century.
And so a half a century ago, in fact, quite literally this year, just a month or so ago, was the debut of your first financial futures product, the Ginnie Mae.
October 20th, 1975, a day that I will remember, along with a day in August for the Treasury bonds 2 years later. But yeah, it was exciting. I loved this city, gave me every dream, and it provided to all of you just a whiteboard to do whatever you want, okay? And that's the characteristic of the industry that we're all a part of today.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. And isn't it great to see Chicago looking so good? Yeah. I haven't been here for a few years. It's a joy to see how great Chicago looks at the moment, despite the fact that it has lost 10,000 floor traders during the course of the last decade or so, still has managed somehow or other to coalesce magnificently and move forward. So you've had this incredible career, and I mean, we're jumping around very, very quickly. It's been so long, but you and I, obviously, we got to really work together and have great fun when we were building single stock futures for the Life Exchange, amongst others. You were very closely involved in that deal, of course, bringing in Battery Ventures to rejuvenate the Life Exchange under the late great Sir Brian Williamson. It's quite funny, though. The bits that I think we remember are possibly not the direct conversations about single stock futures, but the asides. I seem to remember we were talking about some sort of market. It began with a P. I don't know if you can recall. There was a market set there that we thought, you know, that could go quite well, but we've had to wait a bit. That particular, I think, well, maybe I could.
Prediction markets.
Surely not. No, that could have been it. Yeah, there we were. We were sitting around in the middle of developing single stock futures, and we were talking about what prediction markets could potentially do. Some say they've done not badly. I think if we talk to the Downs family, they might say, yeah, that's going quite well these days, although perhaps without our input.
Yeah, I think that, and I have to tell you that I'm an economist that invents markets and can tell you and Berg that I get it wrong a lot and get it right once in a while. And one of the things that was the first prediction market was catastrophic futures, which didn't work, but ended up being the catastrophe bond contract and insurance swaps, which now constitute 20% of all of the reinsurance in the world. So you may not think it's your invention as a derivatives group, but the futures was the engine which ignited an over-the-counter swaps market where the Citadels and the rest of the world provide cat cover for California fires and Florida hurricanes. So this industry sometimes leaves a footprint that is not readily available to the casual observer, and you would never think, well, this cat bond reinsurance, Warren Buffett, they're not at all related, but this industry really drove a lot of ideas that it doesn't necessarily seem obvious it was behind.
Derivatives of derivatives, as it were.
Yes.
It's quite interesting. So, I mean, you've just brought out another book. Your books are always compelling reading. This one, I do have to say, I love the concept of a carbon hunter. Because in so many ways, it seems to me that what the mainstream media have been telling us for years is that we can't possibly escape from the fact that carbon is everywhere. But it's also fascinating because going back to the origins, we'll get to carbon hunting in a moment, people seem to have forgotten all about acid rain and black rain and these problems. And yet there was possibly one of the best examples of how markets work for the textbooks forever.
Yeah, I think, Patrick, that's the keystone for all government types of efforts to deal with what economists call externalities. And I think that began at a time when people didn't think you could ever use markets in the 80s for social good. It was all of the Tom Wolfe novels, everything ugly about humanity seemed to be in that era. And I got approached and said, you commoditized interest rates, can you commoditize the air? Being a Don Quixote type and Sancho Panza behind him, I struck at the windmill and I said, yes, we got an act passed in Congress. And we said, let's look at sulfur like we look at wheat, measure the crop size, and to figure out how it turns over and project the value of sulfur trading into the future. Very elementary, Chicago exercise. And it turned out that that program wiped out acid rain. It's never even heard of. It costs roughly $2-3 billion a year, and it throws off annually $150 billion of reduced medical expenses associated with lung disease, let alone the clarity of air over Ohio and New York, let alone deacidifying rivers, etc. We got, and we legitimized it, I think, in 1993. We held the first SO2 auction at the Board of Trade. It was keynote by Ronald Coase, who won the Nobel Prize in economics at the University of Chicago. And I think it said to the world, markets and self-interest can achieve social objectives. And that was very important, that we could use these markets. And I think, I'm so bullish I can't even see straight, because I think that whole area of air, water, medicine, that there are biodiversity, there are so many opportunities out there, given AI, given the ability of that to shape standardization and commoditization. I think the next 10 years between AI and all that's going on with compute power, futures on that, is an era of great promise.
And it's fascinating because the enabling technology, I mean, we're talking to the rest of the world at the moment through a $160 camera, which is producing 2,000 megapixels. So it has more processing power in that little box than your whole exchange had in 1971 for a camera, for one purpose. And it's commoditized. And you look at the satellite networks that are going around the Earth at the moment. And in fact, via Starlink, we then get into a whole new world, which is what are we going to do with all the junk that's in space and everything like that. So there are market opportunities truly everywhere.
Yeah, I think those market opportunities are endless, and I think it's only as far as the human capital. And one of the great things about this industry, and one of the things which I am a bit wistful about, is the R&D mechanism that we knew with exchange committees, with LESS, and with crop insurance, things like that, that you could build, is those ideas aren't pleasant. But this industry, whether it was Patrick or Jim Carruth with John Lothian, all of this human capital was phenomenal. And Patrick, the words that you guys in the press send, and then the human capital of young people who are, 21, 22, come into this industry as blank slates. When we formed the Carbon Chicago Climate Exchange, it was three of us and Mike Walsh and Rafael Marquez, and we built something that was really very classic with a team of human capital here in Chicago. Frank Kenk, who worked at the NFA, was able to compliance. We were able to draw on Jim Downs for technology. I don't know if we have that slide with how you start an exchange up there, but if we do, the four corner boxes somewhere. And then the human capital of starting a spot market, developing a registry, going to a futures market, getting people like Dan Scarborough, who now runs Incubex, and Mike McGregor or Quanta. But when you invent a market, particularly of any kind, you've got four University of Chicago kind of lens to look through. There's four blocks. There's the legislative, there's the regulatory, there's the building of the exchange, and then there is the additional contracts, Patrick. And this city has got all of the human capital to do that. We lobbied to get the Clean Air Act. We worked on the Enabling Act of the CFTC. If you don't have Congress that goes along, you create your own synthetic legislation, the Chicago Accord, which was equivalent to the Kyoto Protocol. You bring in 150 people, you go out, you grovel, you crawl, you cajole, you talk to Ford, you talk to AP, talk to Motorola, you say you need to commit to reduce your reductions, you build a consensus, and you create the equivalent. Then you have a legislative function. What do? You have your own teeth, but you're dealing with a time when a voluntary market for carbon reductions looks absurd. So what do? You call up the SEC former Mary Shapiro and you say, I need FINRA to come in and audit all of Ford's plants, all of AEP. You build protocols like that. You have a business conduct committee. You have a compliance committee. You have the ability to do that. Then you outsource with NFA to do your work and on the futures market, and you begin a futures market. So even with a voluntary commodity, I mentioned this to you, you can be enormously effective by creating a private solution for a public good. Whether it's, I shook hands with somebody from Kazakhstan or whether it's anything like that, there's enormous opportunities that our business creates for hedging, price discovery, and ultimately, in some cases, a source of supply. So all of you have the opportunity to look in your own backyards with or without the support of the government to drive change and to use markets for social purposes.
And I think you raise a very interesting point, because a standard European affectation is to always abuse the United States of America for always running World Series, and they barely invite the Canadians to come. But the point about what you're talking about in Chicago, the reach of where Chicago got to. And let's face it, thanks to Chicago, thanks to your work, you spawned the Association of Futures Markets inadvertently, because that led to markets being developed in Uzbekistan, in South Africa, all the way around the world. And that has got to be quite an incredible feeling, to wake up in the morning, head towards the razor, and while you're pondering your wife's latest brilliant artwork, also consider the fact that you did actually promulgate an industry that has reached the world thanks to inspiration from Ronald Coase and many others.
Yeah, I don't think much about that, Patrick. Once in a while, I'm a restless soul. I'm 800 years old. I can't wait for the next project. I can't wait for the next idea. I teach at the University of Chicago. I ask my students to invent a market that's new and what's challenging. And these brilliant kids from, not kids, young men and women from Booth and a law school and Harris come up with markets for space junk, which will be required in 2030, given Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. What are we going to do in traffic for space junk? And then they come up with other markets to create a market for judgeships where you can give half to the Democrats, half to the Republicans, and create a market for people swapping 3 associate judges and 1 appellate court for a Supreme Court, and put a market-based solution to drive politics to the center. Cap and trade for jail space, to have people are incarcerated inappropriately and for lower base crimes, and to put cost bases and benefit bases and have markets reveal what jail capacity is. So the ideas are endless. You know, I think about yesterday is cute, but but it's not exciting when there's so many busy things to do.
And so many busy things to do, and you are the definition of a restless soul. And I'm going to take that away from today, because some people say I'm impatient, and I think I'm an amateur by comparison with you. But if you look at where we are in the market curve at the moment, talk us a bit of the way through. I mean, Carbon Hunters, it's a fascinating book looking at all the different ways in which you both had to seek out the carbon, bring it to market, and also the opportunities that lie there.
People said, how did you have the vision? And it's really good. If you can put up the Keeling curve up on the screen, you didn't have to be too smart. If you trade commodities or a trend follower, in 1992, I took a look at this chart of climate change in Rio, and I said, this is a no-brainer, okay? If I'm a trend follower, it's going to get warmer and warmer and warmer. And it doesn't much matter whether it is man-made or how much of it. The wrong question is being asked, Patrick, in my opinion. The question that is being asked is a question from a scientist or a sociologist, and that is the planet warming? And that is not the right question. That's a Philadelphia lawyer's question. When do you stop beating your partner? Okay. The question that should be asked is, this is a possibility, however remote it is. What is the cost of stopping it versus the benefits that might inure to me? You can call it gambler's ruin, but you're never supposed to make a bet, no matter how good the odds are, that will bankrupt you. So if you can solve a problem that is remotely possible at a very low cost, you do it. You're not supposed to buy life insurance, and you do. You're not supposed to buy quake insurance, but you do. So I said, I think based on acid rain, you can really solve it cheaply. And if the trend's right, then if we look at 1990, where I was in Rio, it's just gone straight up since then. And if you then take a look at Simon Kuznets's curve, and if you could throw that up, you say you had a great year in the 80s. Is economic growth gonna turn up? And what happens is that people, and some of you are in more developed economies than others, as you get wealthier and you put food on the table and shelter in the thing, after that, you start drawing on the cave walls for entertainment. Well, it's no different than environmental spends. When a country feeds and houses its people, but it can't take its kids out because particulates are destroying them, you turn to environmental spend. So it seemed very, very clear to do it. Then you kind of say to yourself, I've got a framework for doing this. And then what's the end goal? And if you could put up the market cap slide, we say, okay, the end goal is a CME with, the chart would show you there's a CME with 105 billion of market cap. There's ICE with 85 billion. All of us in this industry would have never believed, including the two of us, that one Chicago exchange would be bigger than the market cap of all of the Detroit automobile companies. And then you take a look at what's going on with DraftKings and Polymarket, and all of a sudden you get prediction markets, as you and I discussed in the 90s, and you know that there's an end goal and you could raise capital even for as silly an idea as climate change in the London Stock Exchange. And thanks to support from you, Patrick, for all of those new ideas, you aim for that. So now you're getting to the point, the franchises are worth $100 million just for the gateway into the club. So in any event, starting a new market under a regulated framework, and I would suggest lots of you, by dint of regulatory barriers to entry, are sitting, the 29 of you in the AFM have a franchise.
Yeah.
And don't underestimate that franchise. And don't think that you can't possibly reach into products that serve you locally. And given electronic trading, you don't need the liquidity because the marginal cost is so low. Once you've got the regulatory framework, you can do anything.
But isn't the problem there somewhat that, and I mean, I ride on your coattails here at a long distance, but I'm clearly a lateral thinker. You're a very lateral thinker and have so many achievements to score it by. Isn't the difficulty the fact that actually the exchange industry leads you to being a linear thinker? Because you've got to switch on the systems, make sure everything works, make sure everything settles, make sure everything goes through the endless cycles day by day. And one of the problems with unlocking value in the exchange industry can be there have been relatively few very clear thinkers. I mean, one obviously we could mention would be Jeff Sprecher at Intercontinental Exchange, who've really stood up and gone, no, here's what holistically the possibility is, for want of a better term, the game is, and drive it forward.
I turned to finance because I started trading commodities in the 60s because of a guy by the name of Fred Arditi, who was my colleague. But prior to that, I worked on industrial inventive activity. And if you take a look, and there was a famous paper about a large industrial corporation that had 27 major patents, all were bought. Okay, incumbents generally don't invent. If they did, IBM would own Apple, Apple would own Microsoft, Microsoft would own Facebook, that all of the radical changes, the disruptions generally come from outside big established really companies. And that's also true in financial services, that incumbents play an enormous role by commercializing inventions of others. And I think the idea, one of the things I'm wistful about not having floor trading population is they were the seeds of the skunk works. they provided the ideas that drove the incumbents. Given without of this, I think the job is for governments. When we formed, and Ann Cressy was the attorney then, when we formed the CCFE, Patrick, it took us 6 months to get a DCM. It now takes 3 years. What you need to do is collapse that process, turn starting into an exchange as a quick and efficient way to get the license, to build or buy from Connemara or others, to get yourself an NFA or a FINRA to regulate. You can couple together an exchange today, and then the end game is to sell it to the incumbents. So, which is what we did. You know, we had a dream. We listed on AIM at £1 a share. Jeff Sprecher came along, 7.5 pounds a share bid, done, and we're gone. On to the next one. So you can have an entrepreneurial voice in an exchange by coupling it together. You're all too young to remember erector sets, but those of you who do, you couple them together, right, John? You know, you build it, you attach this, you do that. And I think, Patrick, you and I have discussed over the years so many ideas that if you have 1,000 a second, then, and we get animated and spend 2 hours talking about them, and they're possible. You just need to get the ability to have rapid entry into the market and start new entities, or else existing exchanges, whether you're in Budapest or any other, or Prague or Taipei, Taiwan, wherever you are, if you are a individual exchange that has a legacy, set up a skunk works of young people and try to, and forgive me, when we were at CCX, somebody walked into a meeting and said, is there anybody in this organization who's over 30? And I said, no. So, you know, give the work out, hire some young graduates, give them a blank pen, put them in a room if you're an incumbent, and if you're not an incumbent, finance a skunk work of entrepreneurs, put up $1 million, $2 million, give them the equity, and let them go off and invent things. And again, with compute power and now what's going on is fantastic. I think, you know, a guy like Don Wilson today is offering or treating compute, AI, and carbon credits as if it was a single commodity, the same way you drill for gas. If you want to go to silicon data, you go up, you put in your GPUs, and they will, put in the size of your data center, and they will spit out the carbon usage over the next 20 years. You could then go and do a carbon swap for 10 years. You could do compute power for 10 years. I mean, we're going to go into an era where all of that is possible.
And you've spanned a career where when you went along and said, look, I can find you a way to hedge your interest rate exposures, people thought you were Satan.
Well, they not only thought I was Satan, they said, go back to Chicago, or better yet, go to Berkeley and smoke some dope. It was the 60s, and they said, you must be high. Interest rates don't fluctuate, which they didn't. And so, you know, you got one of these when you walked into a New York bank in the late 60s to talk about asset liability management. May I inform you, if you look at history, no banks had asset liability management until the 1980s when the yield curve inverted. So you may think that's always been around, it was mocked as a silly kind of function.
And now we're on the cusp of essentially being able to price everything in a digital environment, and we can see how every possible form of risk is in some way interrelated.
Yes, and let me throw up the last one, Patrick, to quickly conclude, because I can see Pat's leaning over like, like this. If we can put around those circles, just to give you an idea of where we are, and Patrick, you and I discussed this, that if you take a look at 2000, you can see China had 3 million tons of emissions. We had 6, and Europe and I were the same. And if you look at 2024, if you add European emissions to the United States, combined is significantly less than China. Okay. China promises to be the biggest environmental market in the world. It would be, its baseline is 5 million tons, and they just switched. So look to opportunities for in your local countries to match up, to tap into this market. This is going to be the biggest market, and I think all of you should be aware that recognizing that nothing happens in China except all at once. And when we went to Tianjin in 2006 to start a Chinese climate exchange, I drove 3 hours on a 2-lane, 4-lane highway. I came back in 2007. And the lane was 8 lanes, and it took not 3, but 2 hours. And then I came back in 2008, and there was a bullet train that took 32 minutes. So all of a sudden, nothing, and then boom. So watch this, it's creeping up. They're not inviting people like me to speak at major universities because this is the way China operates, because they think it's amusing. Okay, it may be amusing and I may be comical, but the fact is that very smart people are studying that.
And they're making markets, and they're making markets for the future. Richard, where is your next market going to be? Can you share it with us, or is there somewhere in the carbon sphere or beyond that you're already looking at?
I'm very excited about the voluntary carbon market, because I think if you're NVIDIA and you have $5-10 trillion of market cap and you're creating power usage, I would have never believed utilities would be a growth industry. I'm excited about 10 different things. I think the new, and I have a financial instrument, I think there's going to be new exchanges, people like Incubex and Quanta, which I've candidly have a financial interest. I'm long ICE, and I have for quite some time, because I don't never underestimate human capital. So I'm long the exchanges wherever I can, be they in Chicago or Atlanta. The incumbents are all great investments. And as far as new products, I'm thinking of codes and standards for voluntary carbon. I'm thinking of blockchains. And I'm thinking that assets over the next 5 years will probably all be tokenized. It's happening with DTCC. So I'm looking at tokenizing biodiversity and various other things. And I'm looking at water markets, and involved in, I think this country badly needs a market-based solution to healthcare costs. And it is obvious to me that this system is so profoundly broken. It has no financial incentives to do it. It's all about third-party payers. And we all know you don't take a rented car to a car wash. You know, it's just fundamental economics. And and I think that this country spends, 20% of its GDP, $6, $7, $8 trillion, and its life expectancies are falling. People are being bankrupted. The system is totally broken and relies on no market-based incentives. And this is an opportunity for all of you. How could you pay or turn from market and FDA to buy space, to get your drug approved more quickly, time to market, faster cures? These are all things that have no financial incentives. And I think all of you might want to be thinking about that, because with an aging population, with demographics, there's an enormous opportunity to deliver health care at an affordable level to people throughout the world.
From the population pyramid to space to the depths of the oceans, I think we've covered pretty much everything that we can in geopartial space and time. It's a sort of almost like a morning in markets with Jacques Derrida, actually, if I may say so, Richard. It's been a joy. All I would ask, and I will go and implore upon the great chairman, Mr. Kenny, and President Chris Sturgis, later on our Secretary, Christina Kasia, is that we can see you back again in the very near future for another conversation, because this has been illuminating. Thank you very much.
Pat, any time I get an invitation, I'm doing it. Patrick, my friend for so many years, thank you for the opportunity. All of you, we're, colleagues in a great space. The best is yet to come. 10 years from now, we're going to be seeing things that you never thought you would see between AI and compute and the environment and healthcare. Just be part of it and keep the board white for ideas. Keep it blank and let young people participate in the inventive process. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we should offer Professor Dr. Richard Sandor, Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur, who I know does not wish to live off his past successes, but we should give him a standing ovation, because we would not be here without him.
And thus, ladies and gentlemen, with a standing ovation in the Union League Club ballroom, we saluted Professor Dr. Richard Sandor for his many great achievements and elucidating the AFM Tech Day in association with Connemara EP3. What a great discussion it was. It was my honour to manage to speak to Richard in that fabulous environment of the Union League Club, amongst many of the great and good of the world's emerging markets and indeed the established markets of Chicago's exchange-traded derivatives environment. That only leaves us for today, ladies and gentlemen, to talk briefly about our book of the week. It is from another person who's been a serial guest on the IPO-VID series. It's The Rich in Public Opinion, What We Think About When We Think About Wealth by Rainer Zittelmann, examining how we think about a minority who, while undeniably powerful, can still be the subject of scapegoating, often with dire effects for us all. And thus, ladies and gentlemen, that brings to an end episode 192 of the IPO-VID livestream. Don't forget, you can catch all our back issues online wherever you're watching this show today. My huge thanks to Dr. Richard Sandor for his brilliant work, and also the production team led by Janella, who delivered this fabulous live stream recording direct from the Union League Club in order for us to be able to enjoy it on this week's IPO-VID. Stay tuned for our next episode, ladies and gentlemen. In the meantime, of course, if you're interested in building any marketplaces or exchanges, get in touch. And Monday through Friday, you can enjoy Exchange Invest, the exchange of information, the bulletin of the Bourse business, giving the unique, pithy insights into market infrastructure worldwide by going to exchangeinvest.com. My name is Patrick L. Young. Thanks for watching. Have a great week in life and market.